What my team discovered in that frozen wasteland of Siberia wasn't just classified, it was buried so deep that powerful people hoped it would never see daylight again. But after what happened to us, after what we witnessed, the world deserves to know the truth about Project Seraphim, about how World War II really ended, and about the being that still walks among us today. The Siberian wind cut through me like a blade of ice, each gust carrying whispers of death across the frozen wasteland. My breath formed crystalline clouds as I surveyed the coordinates through my scope. Coordinates that officially didn't exist on any map, in any database, in any government record worth mentioning. 30 meters to target, Sergeant Abby Hurst whispered into her comm, her voice barely audible above the howling wilderness. The GPS device in her gloved hands flickered erratically, as if something below the permafrost was interfering with the satellites themselves. I lowered my rifle and studied the structure emerging from the snow like a concrete tumor. The facility looked weathered and battle-scarred, its Soviet-era construction showing decades of neglect. Rust streaked down its gray walls like dried blood, and chunks of concrete had crumbled away, revealing twisted rebar beneath. Yet despite its deteriorated state, the building stood solid against the elements. "Ghost, what's your visual?" I spoke into my throat mic, addressing Corporal Carl Ghost, training, our sniper positioned on the ridge above. "Sir, this place is dead as a doornail," Ghost's voice crackled back. "No heat signatures, no movement. Looks like it's been abandoned since the Cold War ended. But there's something weird about the structure itself. Some sections are built deeper than they should be." Lieutenant Fran Lee adjusted her medical pack and frowned at the facility's imposing facade. "Captain, according to our intel, this installation was evacuated in 1953 during Stalin's purges. Whatever research they were conducting here, they wanted it buried." I felt that familiar itch between my shoulder blades, the one that had kept me alive through 3 tours in hostile territory. My instincts whispered warnings, but our orders were crystal clear. Retrieve any intelligence from the abandoned Soviet research facility. Simple extraction mission. In and out. Nothing about this felt simple. "Stack up on the entrance," I commanded. "Hurst, get us inside. I want to know what the Soviets were hiding in this frozen tomb." Abby approached the reinforced steel door, its surface pitted with corrosion and age. Her equipment detected no electronic locks. The facility predated most modern security systems. The door stood slightly ajar, its heavy frame warped by decades of temperature fluctuations. "Captain, looks like someone already forced entry," she murmured, pointing to scratch marks around the lock mechanism. "Could be scavengers, but these marks look old. Maybe from the original evacuation." The moment we crossed the threshold, our flashlights cut through absolute darkness. The air inside was stale and bitter, carrying the musty scent of decay mixed with something chemical that made Lee's scientific mind uneasy. Water damage stained the concrete walls, and our boots crunched on debris scattered across the floor. Our lights revealed a corridor that spoke of hasty abandonment. Overturned furniture, scattered papers, and personal belongings suggested the evacuation had been sudden and chaotic. Cyrillic text on damaged signs pointed toward different sections of the facility. "Sir." Ghost's voice carried through the static. "External perimeter secure, but I'm getting weird readings on my equipment. Some kind of interference coming from below ground level." I paused at a junction, studying a partially destroyed facility map mounted behind cracked glass. Most of the text was illegible, but Abby managed to translate what remained. Research divisions, administrative areas, and... She traced a finger along damaged sections. Something called Project Archives, deep underground. The corridor ahead descended into the facility's bowels. With each step downward, the air grew colder and more oppressive. Our flashlight beams revealed laboratories that had been stripped bare, leaving only empty shelves and disconnected equipment foundations. But it was the deeper we went that I started finding things that made my blood run cold. In one laboratory, Lee's light illuminated examination tables that made her stomach clench. Not standard medical equipment, but something far more sinister. Metal restraints hung from surfaces that were far too large for human subjects. Stains covered the floor in patterns that suggested violent struggles. "Captain, These restraints... Lee's voice was tight with revulsion. They're positioned for subjects with non-human proportions. Look at these arm extensions. Abby studied the setup with growing unease. And these ceiling anchors. What were they restraining that needed to be held down from above? We found the first real evidence in a storage room filled with filing cabinets. Despite decades of neglect, many documents had survived in waterproof containers. Abby's Russian was rusty, but she could make out enough to paint a disturbing picture. Biological enhancement projects, she translated, her voice growing quieter. References to divine specimens and celestial genetics. Captain, there are medical notes here describing subjects with wings. I felt ice forming in my stomach. Wings? Bone structure modifications, flight muscle development, hollow bone experiments. Abby's flashlight trembled as she read. They were trying to create flying soldiers. The deeper sections of the facility revealed the true scope of whatever project the Soviets had been running. Laboratory after laboratory showed evidence of genetic experimentation. Broken containment units, shattered glass chambers, and most disturbing of all, photographs pinned to bulletin boards showing X-rays of impossibly elongated skeletons. But it was in the deepest vault that we made the discovery that would haunt me forever. The blast doors to the final chamber hung open, their massive frames twisted as if forced apart by tremendous strength. Beyond lay a vault carved directly from the bedrock, its walls lined with Soviet-era monitoring equipment that had long since failed. And there, in the center of the chamber, we found it. I've seen a lot of impossible things in my military career, but nothing prepared me for what we discovered in that vault. The fossil was embedded in a natural crystal formation, as if the rock itself had grown around the ancient remains. Our flashlights revealed a skeleton that defied everything I understood about human anatomy. It was tall, nearly 8 feet, with proportions that suggested incredible physical power. But it was the massive bone structures extending from its back that made us all freeze in silent horror. Wings. Or what had once been wings. The bone structure was unmistakable, designed for flight, with hollow chambers that would have made them impossibly light yet strong. Jesus Christ, Lee whispered, approaching the fossil with scientific fascination warring against primal fear. Captain, this isn't human, but it's not entirely non-human either. Look at the skull structure, the limb proportions. It's like someone took human DNA and enhanced it. Abby had found something else in the shadows. Metal containers marked with biohazard symbols and Cyrillic text warning of dangerous biological materials. Inside, preserved in some kind of suspension fluid, were tissue samples that should have decayed decades ago. Genetic material, she reported, her voice barely a whisper. They extracted samples from this thing. And Captain, some of these containers are empty. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Empty containers meant the Soviets had used the genetic material. They had actually attempted to recreate whatever this creature was. I stared at that angelic fossil, at the evidence of impossible experiments, at the proof that everything I thought I knew about human limitations was wrong. My team stood in stunned silence, each of us grappling with the reality that our world had just expanded into territories that shouldn't exist. But it was Ghost's voice over the comm that shattered our contemplation completely. Captain, you need to get up here. Now. I found something in the administrative building, a hidden archive room. And, sir, there are films here, battle footage from World War II. You're not going to believe what I'm seeing. As we prepared to leave the vault, Lee took one last look at the fossilized remains. In the shifting light of our flashlights, for just a moment, the ancient bones seemed to shimmer with their own inner radiance. What is it, Ghost? I demanded as we began our ascent, my mind already racing with possibilities I didn't want to consider. Sir, I'm looking at classified Soviet war footage, Eastern Front, 1942. And there's a soldier in these films who... Captain, I think their experiment worked. That's when I knew our simple extraction mission had just become something that would change everything we thought we knew about the war that shaped the modern world. The administrative building's basement archive felt like stepping into a frozen time capsule. Ghost had cleared away decades of debris to reveal a hidden chamber behind a false wall, its entrance concealed by what appeared to be structural damage, but was actually deliberate camouflage. The room beyond contained filing cabinets, projection equipment, and most importantly, metal canisters filled with film reels that had somehow survived the decades of abandonment. I descended the concrete stairs, followed by my team, our flashlights cutting through the musty darkness. The air down here carried a different quality, drier, more preserved, as if the space had been sealed against time itself. Water stains marked the walls, but the archive itself remained remarkably intact, protected by Soviet engineering that had outlasted the empire that created it. "How did you find this place?" I asked, as Ghost led us deeper into the archive, our boots echoing off the concrete floor. "Followed the power cables from the main lab," Ghost replied, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "They led to a generator room, but the cables continued past it. Found this hidden panel behind what looked like war damage. The mechanism was disguised as structural reinforcement, but it was actually a sophisticated lock system. Took me 20 minutes to figure out the sequence. The archive stretched further than our lights could penetrate, extending deep beneath the facility like a buried cathedral. Steel shelving units lined the walls, filled with documents, photographs, and equipment that predated most modern military technology. Dust motes danced in our flashlight beams, disturbed for the first time in decades. But it was the projection setup in the center of the room that drew my attention. An old Soviet film projector, still functional despite its age, surrounded by careful arrangements of chairs and viewing equipment. Abby approached one of the filing cabinets, her gloved hands carefully extracting folders marked with red stamps and Cyrillic warnings. The documents were yellowed with age, but remarkably well preserved. "Classification stamps," she translated, squinting at the faded text. "These files were buried deeper than top secret. Look at this. Project Seraphim, Phase 2. Implementation. Authorization level. Stalin direct command only." Lee examined the projection equipment with professional curiosity, running her hands over the mechanical components. "This is 16mm film stock, probably from the 1940s. Military-grade documentation equipment. Whoever archived this material wanted it preserved for posterity. The question is why they hid it so well, and why they thought future generations would need to see it." Ghost had already begun setting up the projector, his mechanical aptitude evident as he carefully threaded the first reel of film through the complex mechanism. "Captain, you need to see this footage before we go any further. What I saw in the preview, it changes everything we thought we knew about the war, about what's possible, about what humans are willing to do when they're desperate enough." As the projector whirred to life, casting dancing shadows on the concrete wall that served as our makeshift screen, I felt that familiar sense of dread settling in my chest. My combat instincts told me that whatever we were about to witness would fundamentally alter our understanding of history itself, and perhaps our understanding of what it meant to be human. The first images flickered across the wall, grainy black and white footage of what appeared to be a standard military briefing. Soviet officers in winter uniforms stood around a table covered with maps, their faces bearing the strain of desperate men fighting a losing war. The camera work was professional, suggesting this was official documentation rather than casual recording. Abby leaned forward, concentrating on the rapid Russian dialogue. December 1942. They're discussing the German advance on Stalingrad. The situation is catastrophic. German forces have broken through multiple defensive lines. Soviet casualties are approaching 1 million. They're talking about complete collapse of the Eastern Front. The footage shifted to scenes that made our stomachs clench with revulsion. Not battle footage, but something far worse. Medical documentation from the deepest levels of the facility we had just explored. The camera captured a sterile laboratory where 13 young Soviet soldiers lay restrained on examination tables, their faces etched with terror and confusion. The lighting was harsh, clinical, designed to capture every detail of what was about to unfold. "Test subjects," Abby translated from the narration, her voice growing tight with emotion. "Volunteers from penal battalions. Prisoners of war who chose this over execution. They were told they would become heroes of the Soviet Union. They had no idea what that actually meant." Lee leaned forward, her medical training making her catch details the rest of us missed. The preparation was extensive, methodical, suggesting months of prior experimentation. Those aren't standard medical procedures. Look at the injection sites. Multiple entry points along the spine, directly into the bone marrow and nervous system. This is genetic manipulation on a cellular level, but with 1940s technology. The precision required would be impossible without... She paused, studying the footage more carefully. Unless they had a template, a genetic blueprint to follow. The footage showed scientists in heavy protective gear preparing syringes filled with luminescent fluid. The angelic genetic material extracted from the fossil we had discovered. Each injection was administered with clinical precision, but the subjects' reactions were anything but clinical. Screams of agony echoed from the film's poor audio as the serum burned through their nervous systems like liquid fire. Subject 1 through 12, Abby continued translating, her voice becoming increasingly strained. Initial genetic integration, unsuccessful. Subject 1 experienced massive organ failure within 6 hours. Subject 2 showed promising cellular changes for 48 hours before complete neurological collapse. Subject 3's bone structure began dissolving while new tissue attempted to grow simultaneously. The camera captured the horrific aftermath in unflinching detail, bodies convulsing as their skeletal structures began to change and fail simultaneously. Soldiers who had volunteered for glory dying in ways that defied medical understanding. Their bones would begin to reshape, becoming hollow and light like bird bones. But the process would fail halfway through, leaving them with structures too weak to support their weight. Their muscles would start to develop the complex fiber arrangements needed for flight, then collapse as their nervous systems couldn't adapt to control the new anatomy. Jesus Christ, Ghost whispered, his voice filled with revulsion. They were guinea pigs. Human experiments on a scale that makes Nazi medical programs look restrained. The scientists showed no emotion as they documented each failure. Cold, clinical notes about genetic rejection, cellular incompatibility, and systemic breakdown. Each death was simply data to be analyzed for the next attempt. The human cost was irrelevant compared to the potential military advantage. But it was Subject 13 that changed everything. The footage showed a young soldier, no more than 20, with the lean build of a rural farmer turned conscript. Unlike the others, his initial reaction to the angelic serum injection was different. Instead of immediate rejection, his body seemed to accept the genetic material. His cellular structure began adapting, evolving, transforming in ways that suggested compatibility rather than conflict. Subject 13 shows positive integration, Abby translated, her voice barely above a whisper. Cellular acceptance rate at 93%. Bone structure modifications proceeding as planned. Proceeding to Phase 2, Radiation Enhancement Protocol. What followed was torture disguised as science. The young soldier was moved to a chamber lined with primitive radiation equipment, crude devices that looked like oversized X-ray machines jury-rigged with Soviet engineering. The radiation bombardment was designed to catalyze the genetic changes occurring within his DNA, accelerating the transformation process from months to weeks. The soldier's screams penetrated even the poor-quality audio as the radiation coursed through his mutating body. His skin would blister and heal within hours, his bone structure visibly shifting as new configurations took hold. The footage captured every moment of his agony, documenting the price of creating something beyond human limitations. "They're cooking him alive," Lee said, her voice filled with professional revulsion. "This level of radiation exposure should have killed him in minutes. The cellular damage alone should have been irreversible. But somehow his body is adapting, using the radiation as fuel for the transformation process." For days, the footage documented the soldier's metamorphosis. His back began to split open, not from surgical incision, but from internal pressure, as new bone structures forced their way through muscle and skin. Wing buds emerged like grotesque growths, slowly extending as his body rebuilt itself from the inside out. The process was violent, uncontrolled, guided only by the genetic template embedded in the angelic serum. The pain was constant, unrelenting. The young soldier's face contorted in agony that seemed to last for weeks. Medical personnel administered morphine in quantities that should have killed him, but his enhanced metabolism burned through the painkillers within hours. He remained conscious through most of the transformation, aware of every change occurring in his body. But gradually, impossibly, the changes stabilized. His wings unfurled, not the beautiful appendages of religious art, but powerful, functional organs of flight. The membrane stretched between elongated finger bones, while powerful muscles developed along his back and chest to control them. The wingspan reached nearly 20 feet from tip to tip, with a bone structure that was both incredibly strong and impossibly light. Transformation complete. Abby translated the final medical notes, her voice filled with awe and horror. Subject 13 has achieved full genetic integration. Physical capabilities exceed all projections. Designated as Seraph 1. Cleared for combat deployment. The film jumped forward to show the newly created hybrid in a training facility. He moved with inhuman grace, his wings folding against his back like a living cloak. His reflexes were impossibly fast, his strength far beyond human limitations. But his eyes held the hollow stare of someone who had endured unbearable suffering to become something no longer entirely human. The transformation had saved his life, but cost him his humanity. Then came the battle footage that would redefine my understanding of World War II. December 15, 1942, outside Stalingrad. The camera followed a Soviet reconnaissance unit as they positioned themselves to observe German troop movements through the frozen cityscape. Wehrmacht forces were advancing through the ruins with methodical precision, their winter camouflage allowing them to blend with the snow-covered landscape. The German Sixth Army was confident, professional, expecting another victory in their seemingly unstoppable advance across Eastern Europe. German forces advancing on Strategic Position 7. Abby translated the military communications crackling over the radio. Soviet forces ordered to retreat. Enemy strength overwhelming. Conventional resistance deemed futile. The German advance was a textbook example of Wehrmacht efficiency. Panzer tanks rolled through the streets while infantry units cleared buildings with practiced precision. Machine gun nests were established with overlapping fields of fire. Artillery positions were surveyed and prepared. They had turned urban warfare into a science, and they had no idea they were being watched from above. The camera tilted skyward, capturing a figure circling high overhead like a predatory bird. At that altitude, Seraph 1 appeared as nothing more than a dark speck against the gray winter sky. But as he began his descent, wings folded tight against his body to maximize speed, the full horror of what the Soviets had created became clear. The hybrid soldier dropped like a stone, his enhanced metabolism allowing him to withstand G-forces that would kill a normal human. German spotters noticed the falling object too late to react effectively. By the time they raised their weapons, Seraph 1 had spread his wings and landed in the center of their formation with an impact that shattered the frozen ground and sent shockwaves through the surrounding buildings. What followed was unlike any combat footage in military history. The winged soldier moved through the German ranks like a force of nature unleashed. His enhanced strength allowed him to tear through steel helmets with his bare hands, crushing skulls like eggshells. When German soldiers opened fire with their Mauser rifles, he used his wings as shields, the bullets ricocheting off the reinforced bone structure with metallic pings. Then he would take to the air again, swooping down to strike from impossible angles before his enemies could track his movement. Mein Gott, was ist das? German voices screamed from the captured audio, their professional composure shattered. Das ist kein Mensch, das ist ein Dämon aus der Hölle! The psychological impact was more devastating than the physical destruction. Hardened Wehrmacht veterans who had conquered most of Europe fled in terror as the angelic figure tore through their ranks. Some dropped their weapons and ran, abandoning positions they had held against conventional Soviet forces for weeks. Others fell to their knees, crossing themselves and praying in dialects the hybrid soldier probably didn't understand. But it was the tactical implications that truly changed the war. Seraph 1 could gather intelligence by flying behind enemy lines completely undetected. Radar technology was primitive, and aircraft recognition systems weren't designed to track human-sized flying objects. He could appear anywhere on the battlefield within minutes, striking supply convoys, command posts, and artillery positions with surgical precision. The footage showed battle after battle, each more devastating than the last. At Kursk, the hybrid soldier destroyed an entire panzer division by dropping anti-tank mines from heights no conventional aircraft could safely navigate. The tanks below had no warning, no chance to defend themselves as explosives rained down from the sky with pinpoint accuracy. During the siege of Leningrad, Seraph I broke the German stranglehold by systematically eliminating artillery positions that had starved the city for months. The footage showed him diving through flak fire that should have shredded him, his enhanced healing allowing him to survive wounds that would kill normal soldiers. German gunners couldn't track his movement, couldn't predict his attack patterns. "Look at his face during the combat," Lee observed, studying the close-up shots captured by Soviet war correspondents. "There's no joy in it, no satisfaction. He fights like someone fulfilling a grim duty, going through the motions of warfare without any emotional investment." The footage revealed the emotional toll of his transformation. Between battles, Seraph I was shown sitting alone in bombed-out buildings, his wings wrapped around himself like a protective barrier. Soviet soldiers kept their distance, regarding him with a mixture of awe and fear. He had become too powerful, too different to form normal human connections. His enhanced senses could hear conversations from miles away. His improved vision could see details that revealed the worst aspects of human nature: enhanced healing, extended lifespan, but complete social isolation. Abby read from psychological evaluation reports that accompanied the footage. Subject shows signs of severe depression, disconnection from human emotion. Repeated attempts at normal social interaction have failed. The price of divinity appears to be humanity itself. The most disturbing footage came from the final assault on Berlin in 1945. Seraph I flew through the burning cityscape like an angel of judgment, his wings silhouetted against the flames consuming the Third Reich's capital. German defenders scattered before him, but there was no triumph in his movements. Only the mechanical completion of a mission that had cost him everything human about himself. By this point in the war, his reputation had spread throughout the German military. Soldiers would abandon positions at rumors of his approach. Entire units would surrender, rather than face the winged demon that haunted their nightmares. The Wehrmacht's legendary discipline crumbled when confronted with something that challenged their understanding of reality itself. The footage captured his final documented military action: the assault on Hitler's bunker. Seraph I descended through the smoke and fire like divine retribution, his wings creating downdrafts that scattered debris and revealed the underground entrance. SS guards fired desperately at the approaching figure, their bullets having no more effect than raindrops against a mountain. But it was what happened after the bunker fell that revealed the true tragedy of his existence. The final documented footage was dated May 8, 1945. Victory in Europe. Seraph I stood among the ruins of Hitler's bunker, his wings folded as he surveyed the devastation his actions had helped create. Soviet officers approached to congratulate him, to celebrate the victory they had achieved together. But he turned away from their praise, walking toward the bombed-out window that overlooked the devastated cityscape. Without ceremony or farewell, without acknowledgement of his comrades or the victory they had won, he spread his wings and launched himself into the sky above defeated Berlin. The camera followed his flight until he disappeared into the smoke-filled clouds, never to be seen again in official records. "He left," Ghost said quietly, his voice filled with understanding that came from his own struggles with warfare's psychological toll. The war ended, and he just walked away from everything. From the glory, from the gratitude, from the chance to be celebrated as a hero. Abby had found additional documentation, intelligence reports from the post-war period that painted a picture of desperate searching. Multiple governments tried to locate him. American, British, French intelligence services all launched major operations to find the hybrid soldier. The CIA alone spent millions on the search. None succeeded. It's like he vanished completely from the face of the earth. The reports detailed sightings across the globe. A winged figure seen during the Korean War. Mysterious interventions in conflicts throughout the Cold War. Humanitarian missions in disaster zones where survivors reported being rescued by something that couldn't be human. But none of the sightings could be confirmed. None of the reports could be verified. But it was the most recent document that made my blood freeze in my veins. A report dated just 6 months ago, filed by an intelligence agency whose letterhead had been redacted. Satellite imagery showing unusual thermal signatures in remote locations worldwide. Eyewitness accounts of winged figures intervening in conflicts around the globe. A pattern suggesting that something, or someone, was still out there, still watching over humanity's struggles with the patience of the immortal. "Sir," Ghost said, his voice carrying a new edge of urgency and something approaching reverence. If this soldier is still alive after all these years, if he's still out there somewhere, then our extraction mission just became something much more complicated, I finished, my tactical mind already racing through the implications. Lee was studying medical reports with growing amazement, her scientific background allowing her to understand the full scope of what we had discovered. Captain, according to these files, the genetic modifications weren't temporary enhancement. Enhanced cellular regeneration, resistance to aging and disease, lifespan measured in centuries rather than decades. If Seraph 1 survived the war, if the transformation was as successful as these reports suggest, he could still be alive today, still active, still protecting humanity from threats we can't even comprehend. As if summoned by our discussion, a sound echoed through the facility above us, the heavy thud of footsteps in the main laboratory. Someone, or something, had entered the building while we were absorbed in the historical footage. The steps were measured, deliberate, moving through the facility with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where they were going. And those footsteps sounded nothing like any human gait I had ever heard. My team exchanged glances, hands moving instinctively to their weapons. Somewhere above us, moving through the laboratories where we had discovered the angelic fossil, was something that walked with the measured pace of someone who belonged there, someone who had been waiting for us to uncover the truth about Project Seraphim. "Ghost," I whispered into my comm, my voice barely audible. "Do you have eyes on the main entrance? Report your status immediately." Static answered me. Our sniper, positioned outside with clear lines of sight on all approaches, was no longer responding to communications. The footsteps above grew closer, descending toward the archive level where we had hidden ourselves among the secrets of humanity's greatest military experiment. Whatever was coming had found us, and escape was no longer an option. I checked my weapon and signaled my team to prepare for contact. We had come seeking Soviet intelligence and found evidence of humanity's most desperate gamble. Now we were about to discover whether that gamble was still very much alive, still walking among us after 8 decades of self-imposed exile. The footsteps above had stopped. I held my breath, finger hovering over my weapon's trigger as silence settled over the facility like a burial shroud. My team remained frozen in position, each soldier's training warring with the impossible reality of what we had just witnessed in the archived footage. "Movement, 2nd floor," Abby whispered, her voice barely audible as she monitored her detection equipment. "Single target, but the thermal signature is wrong somehow." Lee checked her medical scanner, frowning at readings that defied explanation. Body temperature is elevated beyond normal human parameters. Bone density readings are off the charts. Whatever's up there isn't entirely human. The silence stretched on, broken only by the distant whisper of Siberian wind through the facility's damaged structure. Then, without warning, the lights went out completely. Emergency protocols kicked in as my team activated night vision equipment, bathing our world in green-tinted unreality. But the darkness felt different now, charged with potential, as if something vast and powerful was moving through the shadows above us. "Contact front!" Ghost's voice suddenly crackled through our comms, filled with panic. "Something just dropped from the sky. I repeat, aerial contact." The transmission cut to static. "Ghost, report!" I hissed into my microphone, but only silence answered. Above us, the footsteps resumed. But now they were descending toward the archive level with purpose and determination. Whatever had found Ghost was now coming for us. I made a tactical decision. Move to defensive positions. If that's Seraph 1, we treat this as first contact with an unknown combatant. Rules of engagement are weapons-free if threatened. My team spread throughout the archive, using the projection equipment and filing cabinets as cover. Our night vision revealed the archive's layout in stark detail. Multiple entry points, limited escape routes, and nowhere to run if our visitor proved hostile. The footsteps reached the archive entrance. A figure appeared in the doorway, and my breath caught in my throat. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary man, average height, wearing simple civilian clothes that belonged to no particular era. Dark hair, unremarkable features, the kind of person you'd pass on any street without a second thought. But something about his presence filled the room with electric tension. "American soldiers," the figure said. his English accented with traces of Russian, but perfectly understandable. "You've seen the records." "Identify yourself," I commanded, my rifle trained on the stranger's center mass. "This facility is under investigation by—" The man moved. It wasn't human movement. Too fast, too fluid, like watching water flow uphill. Before I could process what was happening, the stranger had crossed the room and was standing directly in front of me, close enough to touch. "You won't need the weapons," the man said quietly. "I'm not here to fight." That's when Abby made the mistake that changed everything. Startled by the impossible speed, her finger tightened on her trigger involuntarily. The rifle barked once in the confined space, the muzzle flash strobing like lightning. The bullet struck the man's center mass and stopped. Not deflected, not absorbed. Stopped, as if it had hit an invisible barrier inches from his chest. The projectile hung in the air for a heartbeat, then dropped harmlessly to the floor with a metallic ping. "Warning shots are unnecessary," the man said calmly, but something had changed in his posture. Lee fired next, then Ghost's replacement shots from his backup position. Each bullet met the same fate, frozen in midair, then falling uselessly to the ground. My team's training took over, automatic weapons fire filling the archive with thunder and lightning. That's when he revealed what he truly was. Wings erupted from his back. Not the mechanical unfurling we had seen in the historical footage, but an explosive expansion that filled the archive with shadow and wind. The wingspan was massive, stretching from wall to wall, each wing membrane rippling with power that spoke of decades of use. The bones were visible through translucent skin, glowing faintly with their own internal light. The wings swept forward, creating a barrier that deflected the remaining gunfire harmlessly away from his body. Spent ammunition scattered across the concrete floor like deadly confetti as our weapons clicked empty. "Enough," he said, and his voice carried authority that made our trigger fingers freeze. I said, "I'm not here to fight." The wings folded back against his shoulders, disappearing beneath his ordinary clothes as if they had never existed. But the power remained, filling the space around him like heat radiating from a forge. I lowered my weapon, my tactical mind processing what we had just witnessed. "You're him, Seraph 1, the hybrid from the footage." "I was," the man replied, sadness touching his features. "Once upon a time, I was a weapon, a tool of war created by desperate people in desperate times. But that war ended long ago, and I chose to leave that life behind." "You've been hiding," Abby said, her voice filled with awe and fear. "All these decades, you've been living among us." "Not hiding," he corrected. "Waiting, watching, protecting when necessary, but always from the shadows. Humanity has faced many threats since 1945, but most of them, you've handled yourselves. You've grown stronger, more capable. You haven't needed an angel of war." Lee stepped forward, her scientific mind overriding her survival instincts. "The genetic modifications. How have you survived this long? The cellular regeneration alone should have killed me years ago," he finished. "Yes, the Soviet scientists thought so too. They expected me to burn out within a decade, maybe two. But the angelic DNA they used was more durable than they anticipated. I heal. I endure. I continue." Ghost's voice crackled through our comms, weak but alive. "Captain, whatever you're talking to up there, it saved my life. Something else was out here, something that shouldn't exist." He drove it off. The hybrid's expression darkened. "Which brings us to why you're really here." I felt pieces clicking into place. This wasn't a random intelligence mission. Someone wanted us to find this place, to discover the truth about Project Seraphim. "Your government operates a program you're not cleared to know about," the hybrid confirmed. "Supernatural Threat Assessment Division. They monitor dangers that conventional military forces can't handle. Recently, those threats have been escalating." "What kind of threats?" Abby asked, though part of her didn't want to know the answer. "The kind that humanity faced before," he replied, his ancient eyes holding memories of horrors we couldn't imagine. "Demons walking the earth. Entities from realms that exist parallel to yours. Things that feed on human suffering and chaos. The barriers between worlds are weakening, and they're taking notice." Lee checked her scanner again, noting readings that still made no scientific sense. And they want your help. They want me to return to what I was, he said, resignation heavy in his voice. To become a weapon again. To fight wars that will make World War II look like a minor disagreement. The implications were staggering. I found my voice. And if you refuse, then humanity faces the darkness alone. The hybrid moved to the archive windows, looking out at the frozen landscape. I've watched your species grow, develop, overcome challenges that should have destroyed you. But what's coming? Conventional weapons won't be enough. Ghost limped into the archive, supported by makeshift bandages. Sir, there were 3 of them out there, shaped like men, but wrong. Their faces. He shuddered. They're testing our defenses, probing for weaknesses. It's already begun, the hybrid said quietly. The first incursions. They're learning about your world, your capabilities. Soon, they'll come in force. I made my decision. What do you need from us? The hybrid turned back to us, and for the first time, we saw something like hope in his expression. I need soldiers who understand what they're fighting for. Not glory, not conquest, but survival. Humanity's future depends on people willing to stand against the darkness, even when that darkness wears familiar faces. You're talking about a war unlike anything we've ever fought, Abby said. Yes, he replied simply. And I'm tired of fighting alone. The weight of his isolation was palpable. 8 decades of carrying humanity's burden without companionship, without recognition, without rest. He had become something beyond human experience, but he had never stopped caring about the species he was created to protect. There's a base, Lee said slowly, classified beyond anything we've ever seen. If this program really exists... It exists, the hybrid confirmed. And they've been waiting for me to accept their invitation, to join the fight that's been building since the day I disappeared from Berlin. I looked at my team. Soldiers who had signed up to serve their country, not to battle supernatural forces beyond human comprehension. But I saw determination in their faces, the same resolve that had carried us through impossible missions before. Then we go together, I said firmly. All of us. The hybrid studied us for a long moment, perhaps seeing something in our unity that he had lost long ago. Slowly, almost hesitantly, he nodded. Very well. But understand, once we leave this place, once you join this war, there's no going back to the world you knew. You'll see things that will haunt your dreams, fight enemies that shouldn't exist, and protect people who will never know your names. Sounds like every mission we've ever run, Ghost said with dark humor. For the first time in decades, something resembling a smile touched the hybrid's features. Then let's go save the world, again. As we prepared to leave the facility that had held its secrets for so long, the hybrid spread his wings one final time. Not as a weapon or a threat, but as a promise, that humanity would not face the coming darkness alone. The Angel of War had found his purpose again.